Hey everyone, we're back with our third episode of the podcast here with Jayden Haywood. Jayden is a investor, developer, and also a engineer on the energy side as well too. So we're looking forward to having pretty in-depth conversation in terms of just what he's seeing with his developments, and then also some really cool applications and some new algorithms that you guys are kind of putting together on the energy audit side when it comes to MLSelect and the energy efficiency program. I think some tips and tricks that are going to help individuals who are taking advantage of that program save some money and be able to get the full points without having to kind of break the bank on your renovation. So looking forward to the conversation and happy to have you on.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the opportunity. Definitely. Before we started rolling, I was saying I actually learned a lot from watching your earlier podcast. So it's funny to find myself in the chair.
All full circle.
All full circle, yeah. And yet here we are.
Yeah. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about, what makes you tick? What are you doing? How's it working? What are you up to?
Yeah, so my background, why don't I start there? I co-founded a consulting engineering firm in 2010. It was at a time where businesses were looking for ways to save energy and to save money and to become more efficient. I think we were in a little bit of a recession back in like 2008, 9, and 10. I was just out of university, so like great time to try to get a job, when like nobody's hiring. So I reached out to a couple of my friends that are significantly smarter than me. One of them was an engineer, one of them was an accountant. And we started door knocking commercial businesses, multifamily, asset owners, and we would go in there and we would essentially audit buildings. We would go in. There was big incentives and rebates back in 2008 for anybody that would take on either a audit. So audits used to be covered by the province. It would be completely free for a building to get an energy audit done. So like, let's just say like a multifamily. And then any upgrades they would do, they would have incentives and rebates. So that's kind of how I wet my beak in the energy space. From there, we grew. We started doing like energy modeling. We started teaching and coaching building owners, asset owners, low-hanging fruit projects that they could tackle that had like big impacts. So I kind of got this blueprint of watching the big guys do it. Like my clients were like Canlight Hall, Tridel, Brookfield, MRCM. And we would watch how they would either acquire apartment buildings or build apartment buildings, use energy efficient conservation measures, whether it was lighting, water fixtures, heating and cooling systems, building envelopes. We'd watch how they would either buy and repurpose or build anew and then take advantage of all these rebates and incentives. So that's kind of like how I got my view or peripheral opened up to multifamily and going green, so to speak, and like all the benefits that came with it. But like my background was specifically identifying low-hanging fruit projects that saved big amounts of money or operational expenses, and then rebates and incentives.
And that's what the old CMHC program was. Like MLSelect, wasn't around 2008. It was simply just like an energy efficiency rebate program with CMHC. So you'd go, do whatever sort of upgrades on the energy efficiency side, greenhouse gas reductions, and then you'd go back to CMHC and apply for these rebates. Whereas, kind of an inefficient program. If you're doing everything up front, on a repositioning program, like why, you should be able to take advantage of those savings up front and build that all in. It makes sense how they've transitioned to the MLSelect program and make it a little bit more efficient, have everything done up front versus having to, find a way, finance, then have to go back to CMHC, apply for the rebates. I mean, as we know, the process with CMHC isn't, the quickest or the smoothest sometimes. So, to be able to just structure everything up front and have it in one go, I think it makes more sense to transition that way.
The new program right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, versus what it was. My experience back in 2010 was namely working with like provincial rebates. We knew the federal rebates were out there. They were a little harder to attain. But to your point, I wasn't sure how people were paying for these upgrades. Like I had no idea how, they would drop $250,000 on a new boiler or a new chiller or $100,000 on a lighting upgrade. The economics made a ton of sense. How they were financing it back then, I had no idea. But yeah. It would make sense to advance funds to do these projects if your ultimate goal is to reduce, energy and ultimately operating expense. So
I mean, I think the issue is the fundamental thing is the developers, and it's nice to know that they're doing it, but deep down inside, they're doing it out of a selfish reason to be able to either get capital back, to increase the efficiencies of the building, meaning the increase the NOI, their asset value increases. Like, makes people feel all warm and fuzzy inside that they're doing these upgrades. But when it all boils down to it, it's all about financing, which, I mean, it's kind of cool that CMHC decided that they were going to create all this, all the energy efficiency around old stock and new stock, make things better. But when it all comes down to it, we fast forward to 2021, new program comes out, and there's a bunch of inefficiencies and loopholes in the program. It's like they put it together, they slapped it up, and they said, "Okay, market, here you go." And realistically, I think they said like they were expecting 20% of the
it was
applications to
low.
go to MLI.
Yeah,
It was low. They were not expecting the absolute wave of investors to take a look at this product and use it, and then it exploded, and nobody really understood how to get the energy points. And thus, you guys show up, you already have the background, you have the experience, you've done it before, you saw the opportunity. Like, how did that work out? Like, kind of a perfect storm of you started developing at the same time, and
Yeah. So like looking at the energy question first, like we had been doing energy modeling for 15 years at that point, but for completely different reasons than what the MLI Select called for, right? And to your point earlier, people usually will take on energy projects for the planet, for people, or for profit, right? With the MLI Select, I think it was a very, very clear message that developers were seeing a path to profit. They were seeing very, very favorable financing terms. And I think that there was a lot of developers and asset owners that have done energy retrofits leading up into that point. So they saw this program and they're like, oh, well, I know exactly how to make my building a little bit more efficient. We sat on the sidelines as an engineering firm. We'd been doing energy modeling for quite some time at that point. The requirements for the MLI Select were a little bit different, right? So we had to tweak our energy modeling. But yeah, we kind of had this aha moment where we said, listen, outside of our conventional ways of marketing, why don't we partner up with lenders? Why don't we partner up with like CMHC approved lenders or brokers and find out all of their clients that were trying to pursue this energy route, right? And so, our background and experience was always identifying ways to save energy, and it was always implementing the projects to do so. So now, as opposed to us, really hammering the calls and putting forth like a solid sales effort, our phones blew up. Like we were overwhelmed with business. We went from doing, a handful of energy models a year, for various reasons, to doing like 20 energy models a month. And in the last, I'm going to say 16 months, I think we've done just over 330 energy models and have either helped facilitate or been a part of a little over $1 billion worth of loans.
yeah, I think it's important to understand like the reason why a lot of the clients who were pushed to this was out of necessity. The MLI program essentially bailed every single real estate investor who was in a multifamily bridge loan out over the last 2 years. So, they realized either after they bought the property, they had to find a solution to get this done. And the MLI program was really the only one that made the numbers work when the debt was so high. Creates a perfect storm of needing this capital out of necessity. And really interesting to see how the market absorbed the product. So you got into it, 2021, 2022 happened.
Yeah.
And you decided you were going to build at the same time?
Well, something before 21 happened. COVID happened, right?
Yes.
So think about my clients. My clients were long-term care. My clients were, again, like some of the names that I'd mentioned before, condominiums, apartments, multifamily asset holders. And during COVID, we weren't able to go into any one of these buildings, right? So like we laid off, the entirety of our staff, ourselves included. We had all these, trucks sitting in the parking lot. We were just like sitting on our hands. And my story, funny enough, I was sitting at my cottage in the summer, I think of like 2020, and a friend of mine had brought up this laneway suite program. It's like, oh, have you heard about this laneway suite program? You can build laneway suites in your backyard. And like, not being a numbers guy, which I'm not, I thought very high level. I said, well, how much could a laneway suite like cost? You know what I mean? And so like, I'm like, well, what if it cost X amount of money? I had a house in Toronto at the time. So I'm like, well, I know what I could get rent-wise. On a very, very high level, I thought to myself, could I find a better place to put my money in the market that would give me that kind of return on an asset that I already owned, unlevered, and doing something that I know how to do? Like, of course, I was going to build it energy efficient, but this was before I knew of any rebates or incentives that would, promote me to do so. So I bought real estate when I was younger because I always thought it was a method to crystallize some wealth, and I thought it was a good place to park money. But my real estate journey started when I uncovered the Laneway Suite program. So we started going around during COVID and buying up single family homes in my neighborhood in Toronto that I live in. I live in Leslieville. And the plan was to just buy single family homes and then just build Laneway Suites. That was it. That was going to be it. And then my business partner, who's a lot smarter than I am, I think had heard rumblings through some, he on his free time, he like goes to like these city hall meetings. Like that's what this guy does for fun.
Sounds exhilarating.
Yeah, it's just he's that guy, right? Like, and he compliments me really, really well because like he was doing that while I was sitting on the dock at my cottage, and he's like, Jayden, of all these single family homes we're buying right now, I'm hearing rumblings that there's going to be some amendments to some bylaws and some policy changes that could allow us to build, a threeplex or a fourplex in the front of the house and the Laneway Suite. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, like it made sense. Like to me, it seemed like this was the highest and best use of land. All of our projects are in the city of Toronto, right? Like we're like our width of our properties are like 20 to 25 feet. They're all like little mini or mini infill projects. So it was good. It made sense. So like, we parked our money, we bought some land, we kind of like banked these pieces of properties that we thought were going to be really, really good properties to build little triplexes. And then actually like, again, bringing it back to learning about the MLSelect, we figured that, or we kind of like stumbled across this MLSelect program, and it said if you build 5 units and if you build them energy efficient, well, then there's even more incentive and more rebate to do so. And like with these incredible financing terms, because I'll tell you, it would not have worked financially with a typical mortgage. It wouldn't have. Like, and I don't have a background in real estate. I'm not trained in real estate. So like my experience was single family home, go to RBC, go to Scotia, go to TD, get a conventional mortgage, and you're in the real estate game. But this MLSelect program is like, well, hang on a second. If you do, X, Y, and Z, you can get this 50-year term. You can have little equity in the deal. The debt requirements are like really, really minimal. Non-recourse loans in some cases. So anyway, that was kind of like our aha moment. That's kind of how we stumbled into doing what we're doing right now.
I think like definitely the emergence of MLSelect, like overall, when you take a look at, commercial financing, when we started underwriting in like 2020, 2021, you were underwriting uninsured debt at 3, maybe 3.5%. CMHC debt was even less than 1-ish, 1.5, like sometimes even sub 1%, I think, on the CMHC side, if I'm remembering. But, like as guys start to get into these projects aren't, 6 months projects in some situations, apartment turnovers, construction, stuff like that. Your year, your 18 months, sometimes your 24-month projects. Well, you start taking a look at where the rates went, and as guys are getting into projects, assuming they're coming out at like 3.5% debt uninsured, all of a sudden that takeout financing is being underwritten at 6.5%, 7%. So all of these projects that were, completely viable, super successful, got hit with like an immovable object, which was like just this doubling of the rates. And on the commercial side, like that's huge, right? Like you're not able to bump that up with your personal income. It's like your building's either qualifying or it's not. And then MLSelect comes out, 1.1 debt servicing, up to 95%, loan to cost, loan to value. Like you said, sometimes the non-recourse stuff, amortization is up to 50%. And it was just like a godsend saving program almost, where all of a sudden all these projects that were, guys having to pay back investors, guys even just trying to get their own money out, even just exit successfully, now they're able to work. And it was just like a flurry of, people saying like, hey, MLSelect. I think like MLSelect is probably one of the hottest, words or 2 words over the last like 3-4 years in Canada, right? Like everyone talks about it, everyone knows about it. And it really did. It saved the commercial market. Absolutely. For anything that was 5 units and above. It was, an even more successful product, I think, in my opinion, when you could get 100 points on the energy efficiency side. Now that they've kind of cut that in half, it's really pushing people to the affordable, the rents, which is obviously a challenge in major markets in Ontario. But yeah, it saved and it's propped up the commercial markets. And I think, we'd be in a completely different situation today. I mean, obviously the standard program was still there, but the competitiveness of the MLI Select program to have that 1.1 debt service and a 50-year AM instead of a 1.2 or 1.3 and a 40-year AM. Still a great product, but you're looking at like another 100 to 150,000 for every $1 million of value in the project, which is huge for these investors, especially in a market like we're in today where the liquidity is so tight that these investors need every single dollar back to be able to pay their investors back, or even just pay out the bridge debt that they got into. So yeah, it's been a super successful program. It does blow my mind, like we mentioned earlier, that they weren't expecting a higher volume. When you take a look at the structuring that they were offering, who sat down and said, I don't see anyone being interested in this product with 50-year AMs.
This would be
and,
moderately
yeah,
successful.
I can't see why
1.1
people
debt
would want,
service.
the most, the craziest qualifying product, on earth. So it's been interesting. But I think, from what we've seen and from what I've seen too, in terms of some clients, the understanding of the product in terms of how they're scoring when it first came out was kind of a bit misunderstood. Obviously, there's differences when you're buying a new build and having to take a look at actual reductions below current baseline versus new construction, and then just having the efficiencies there above the code. So I think there was a bit of a learning curve there for understanding the differences of the two and then how to achieve them. And then from your guys' end and what you guys were able to sit down and understand, obviously from your background in the industry being almost 20 years, obviously there's a lot of conversation about heat pumps, but there's a lot of other ways that you can go in with a much more affordable options to be able to achieve these points and score the points. Like, it's not all about new roof, windows, and heat pumps, which are these high dollar items. There's a lot of other things that you can look at that can get you the same savings and the same energy efficiencies, maybe half the price, or at least you can probably cut that by a third of the price depending on the market that you're in. I don't know, maybe you want to kind of talk about what you're seeing in terms of some of the strategies that you guys are implementing yourselves and that you've been implementing for clients and some of their buildings.
Yeah, and it kind of boils down to what our clients' goals are. Like, you have to ask yourself, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Is it 15% efficiency? Is it 40% efficiency? And we can kind of work backwards from there.
I think it's always 40% now.
Yeah.
Everyone's looking for that.
Well, you'd be
50
surprised.
points.
I still get some. Listen, outside of major markets, there is still a way that the underwriting works with affordability.
Yeah.
Right. And there is still a need for accessible housing too. And it's funny, I can share some anecdotal stories of how I'm even seeing affordability still work in Toronto. But you're right. Namely, people are saying, how do I become 40% more efficient? And again, somebody that's been doing energy modeling and energy retrofits for 15 some odd years, when we were seeing the original case studies coming at us, it looked as though somebody was just going through a no-brainer laundry list of the most expensive projects that they could implement that they knew, yielded, in fairness, yielded high energy savings. But to us, somebody that looks through the lens of like value engineering and somebody that has put together construction budgets before and pro formas before for my own developments, I said there has to be cheaper ways and cheaper methods that we can achieve that 40%. An anecdotal story that we were talking about before the mics turned on was a chiller system installed at a long-term care facility versus a cooling system installed at student rental in a university town. They're the exact same spec for spec piece of equipment, but they run and they operate completely differently, right? And if you were to switch one with the other, assuming that they were commissioned properly, the buildings would be out of whack, right? So looking at things through a lens of capital cost and like what's going to work on the budget has allowed me to give my clients a little bit more sensical applications of energy conservation measures, right? And the big thing is commissioning. That's kind of, Josh, you and I talked on the phone about commissioning and the success that we're having with it. And for your listeners that don't know what commissioning is, it's essentially ensuring that your equipment and that your building is working and operating based on the operational requirements of that building. The number of tenants, the sizes of the suites, a building in a different climate zone operates a lot differently. I do a lot of projects in North Edmonton, and I personally develop in southwestern Ontario. They could have the exact same piece of mechanical equipment, but they need to run and operate different. So Commissioning, in my opinion, is the cheapest low-hanging fruit project that anybody can take on for a building that's 5 units or 500 units. Commissioning and retro commissioning, if the building's already built, seems to be an absolute no-brainer. It's commonly overlooked because everybody's just saying, well, what piece of equipment can I buy? Like, what do I have to buy? Well, okay, well, like, let's look at your building right now before you buy anything. How can we optimize the way that your building is running? Even small things like smart thermostats, programming setbacks between midnight and 6 a.m. when nobody's awake. I've seen some really, really cool water conservation methods that work and are ultimately effective. But what I realized is, so we've always had this energy mindset. But then when I put on my development hat and I start to think about like the capital cost and budgets and like what's actually going to pencil, how is this going to work? That's when I started saying to our clients, like, listen, you don't have to go out and buy the Ferrari or the Lamborghini of air source heat pumps. There's other methods, right?
I think so many people swallowed that pill over the last 2 years. Like, everybody wanted to get that maximum equity takeout on their project, or they wanted to get those points, spent the money and realized, 120 grand, 150 grand, 200 grand, depending on the building, of putting heat pumps in and then having to consistently maintain them. It's not necessarily a scalable solution. So like having an understanding of that there are other options out there, whether it's like sealing the envelope of the building or and whatnot, I think there's a lot of value in that. And myself personally, we put heat pumps in all of our buildings, and the updated maintenance on these things over time, you have to drain them, you have to clean them.
Yeah.
It isn't necessarily the most efficient use of the building. Like I've had clients who have had people come in and say, listen, like, up north, doesn't make sense to put these up here. Like, you don't need to do it. But on the other hand, you have a policymaker in the government saying, nope, this is what you need to be able to do it. It's almost like you have the actual use of the building, and then you have like people who are just checking the box to make it happen. It's got to be a better way.
Yeah, there's a disconnect between, there's a disconnect certainly with the communication of the technology that's required versus what it is that we're really, really trying to achieve right now. I liken it to putting really, really nice tires on a terrible car. I mean, like it doesn't make sense in a lot of times. And before you spend an arm and a leg on your heating and air conditioning, right? Because that typically is the biggest energy consumer in multifamily is heating and cooling, and that's a no-brainer. Ensure that your building envelope is up to date. Like I'll give you a quick story. I had a client in Eastern Ontario, and they were on the verge of spending like an ungodly amount of money on new air source heat pumps and ripping out a whole boiler system. And we said, well, listen, can we look at just what recaulking your windows would do? What is your air changeover per hour? Have we even looked at that? Like, no, of course we hadn't. Their ACH, which is an acronym that I will try not to use too many more times, but their air changeover per hour was like 4 or 5 an hour. And we were able to tighten it up to around, I think it was under 2 in this specific case. And as opposed to having to install a brand new boiler system and a new chiller, we put on some programmable thermostats, we implemented some setbacks, plugged it into the algorithm, voila. They achieved 40% energy savings, drastically cheaper. I'm not saying air source heat pumps are not good, because honestly, pound for pound, they do yield incredible results. And how they do that is by removing fossil fuel, right? So like, you are future-proofing your building in Canada. There is a drive from the government to remove our reliance on greenhouse gas, and that achieves that. So I'm not talking down on it. I'm saying let's look at the entire building first and foremost before we just change your tires, right? Before let's look at the entire building envelope. Before this started, you and I were talking about high-efficiency water fixtures and how that can have a massive impact on your energy consumption. Let's look at some low-hanging fruit projects before we just go to air source heat pumps.
I think you take a look at, the mid-level investors for sure. It's all about expediency. Like they want the quickest, how can I get the most amount of points as fast as possible? I want to be in and out of my project as fast as possible because, I don't have the money to be carrying this 9.5%, 10% debt. But and there's some things that they skip over, in my opinion, where I think are going to point to a lot of issues that you're taking a look at, but then also may, from a cost analysis of cost per savings, maybe on the higher end, but if you take a look at the overall life of a building, it may make sense to do it up front, right? If you could just get like a building condition report, which a lot of guys forgo, right? It's a $3,000 to $4,000 report. Not every lender requires a building condition report. You know, people like to save their money, but you know, if you can get this building condition report and it tells you, you know, your windows, your windows are leaky, your roof, you're going to have to replace your roof in 3 to 5 years. You know, what all these other things that could point to that are overlapping from an energy efficiency savings standpoint. You know, if your roof is going to need to be replaced in 3 years, you might as well do it now to be able to achieve your points and kind of build that in instead of spending, you know, whatever you're going to spend on stuff and then also have to do your roof later. You know, take a look at doing that in one go or adding that into the budget, right? I think that's just people are always looking to achieve things as quick as possible and as fast as possible. And I think that's why when the program first started, it was like roof, windows, this and that. It was the high bulk items where you know, on paper you only need to change 3 or 4 things, but that gets you all your points versus seeing a laundry list, which might look like a lot of items, but faucets, shower heads, low flow toilets, LED lights, this and that. It looks like a lot more. Still get you the same amount of points, but I think that's just kind of where people obviously gravitate towards. It's easier to kind of soak in and just you know, process that's what's going to give me my points. But I think doing a building condition report is a quick thing to be able to also point to, you know, a lot of deficiencies and things that could overlap with the energy efficiencies in the savings.
Well, there's a difference between the correct answer and the most correct answer. You know, it's almost like this will work. Like you want to refinance, I can give you a refinance, but like, you know, this solution, if we take a little bit more time and understand your portfolio and all these things that work, like this is the best option for you. And I think a lot of the energy auditors or the energy consultants, you know, gave the correct answer, but like if you dig a little bit deeper and, you know, you deal with, you know, a firm that has done this before, who's gone through the process, who's a developer like yourself, who understands the intricacies of it, you start to take a look at, well, what is the most correct answer for the building and how do I do this? I think there's a disconnect again with policymakers, but also with like, you know, auxiliary services that deal with developers but don't understand the actual pain points that they have. You know, again, it's a correct answer, but it's not the really the answer you should be actually getting.
And just overlapping, you know, with government grants, like municipal grants in certain areas, right? And not every municipality is going to offer the same grants for energy efficiencies. You know, even though the MLSE programs changed, there are still a lot of municipal grants that can be taken advantage of. You know, take a look into those. Figure out where's the government going to be able to reimburse you at. You know, I had a client that did a couple larger, you know, projects, 60 plus units, and once he was able to take advantage of the municipal grants, like his cost of energy savings out of pocket was nothing. Like it was a massive saving. So I think also taking a look into figuring out, you know, what kind of, you know, they might be a little bit more expensive up front, but on the back end, if you can get grants for certain items, you know, you're going to impact that net overall cost. Taking a look at stuff like that also going to be, you know, efficient moving forwards.
And you bring up a good point. You know, when you are acquiring an existing building, there's stuff that has to get done no matter what. And I see so many, you know, developers or investors not capture these projects that ultimately yield energy savings. And I'm like, well, you have to change your windows anyway, right? So to your point, don't do it in 24 months. There's a huge incentive to do them in the next 12 months, right? Like let's look at ways to tackle stuff that you have to do.
May not be able to get windows in 12 months, but
it may not. Yeah. Just go windowless. But and then Josh, you bring up a good point too. It wasn't until I started to realize the sensitivity of my construction budget that I started saying, you know, this isn't just going to work. Like I can't just put solar systems on every single one of my buildings in Toronto, right? Like it doesn't work. Like financially, it doesn't work. It doesn't pencil, right? Which is, you know, a term that I'm still getting used to. It doesn't pencil, right? Like my business partner, he and I would create these budgets in like a painstaking 23 revisions for our first development, 23 revisions until we're like, okay, you know what? All that glitters isn't always gold here. Going green sounds great, but there's challenges. There's challenges. It's costly, right?
well, look at a larger building. Like CMHC has a heat pump replacement, like reserve cost. You have to factor this in whenever you're doing your financing. If you have a larger building, you know, 30 plus units at, you know, 180, 190 a heat pump, right? Like once you start factoring that in, you know, in smaller buildings, yeah, you're looking at a few thousand, but in the larger buildings, you're getting into, you know, $10,000, $20,000 sometimes, depending on how many heat pumps you have to put in. So, You know, if there's a way to cut that in half or you know, eliminate the need for heat pumps overall and still get that energy efficiency, you're not only saving money in your pocket on your actual construction costs, but you're saving money in your pocket on your monthly operating costs, and your debt servicing is going to be slightly more efficient. And you know, when we take a look at, you know, how these projects are actually operating once you include your insurance premiums in, some of the margins are pretty thin. You know, at a 1.1 debt service, you add in your insurance premium, that 1.1 quickly goes down to 1.05, 1.03. You know, if you can save $10,000, $15,000 a year on your replacement, you know, that's more money that's back in your pocket and that you didn't have to spend on your budget. So,
Yeah, and I could share, you know, a handful of anecdotal stories of our projects, right? Which are like the little missing middle projects. Like, you know, as have we touched on the fact that I do 4+1?
We've not.
No.
Tell everybody.
Well, okay. So going back to my story, you know, buying single family homes, it ultimately has transitioned to us converting single family homes to the 4+1 model in the city of Toronto. We've developed 4 to date. We've learned a lot. Our first project, it was kind of like measure once, cut twice kind of thing. We had R38 walls, if you know, like big, huge walls, and we found with our, you know, second, third, and fourth projects, they just wouldn't work. They wouldn't work, you know, in relation to how close we were to the neighbors. Like we didn't have room for them. So it was a practice of custom tailoring our baselines and then having to look for other energy conservation measures that made sense. So then the journey for me has been twofold. I mean, you know, yes, I've done hundreds of energy models, and yes, I think that our firm has gotten a lot more outside of the box thinking when recommending energy conservation measures and taking into account building condition assessment reports and taking into account if somebody's had an appraisal done, we can get like a lot of information from that. But then the other hat that I put on is this developer hat now that is relatively new to me, right? So over the last 4 years, this little mission that we've been on converting single family homes to 4+1s have taught me, you know, the importance of budgets, the importance of construction budgets, and ultimately forced me to find cheaper ways to build energy efficient buildings, which is the path that we're on right now.
yeah. I was just gonna say, like, especially on, we're seeing a ton of the infill stuff. I think 8 to 15, 8 to 12 is probably the most common number that I'm seeing in Ontario and then also in Alberta. But I think when you take a look at how difficult it is to get certain types of construction financing on these sub $5 million, you know, sub even like $8 million type loans, it does force you to kind of dial in your budget because you're not getting that 95% loan to cost. You're, you know, maybe getting 80, maybe 85 if you're lucky loan to cost in a good project. And, you know, that 15%, 20%, that number starts to creep up. You know, if you're not dialing in your budget and you're a little bit loose and you're just kind of taking whatever's going to get the job done, you know, the people don't have that money. And, you know, every dollar kind of counts on these mid-sized projects because, again, a lot of these guys are trying to, you know, raise money with private investors, and the more money that they can save and put back in their pockets with understanding the difficulty of getting the high leverage financing, that may be the difference between getting a project done and then someone passing on a project on this mid-level.
If you start to take a look at like the need for this type of debt and the growth of this missing middle space, you know, you take a look at the federal government, they're screaming for additional units. They're trying to incentivize, you know, the average person, I'd say, or the retail investor who's leveling up into this space to actually be able to go and build these things and increase density. It's I don't foresee us like with any of these products going away anytime soon. You know, I think that the pillars of affordability and energy efficiency and accessibility are the groundwork of these products that are going to continue to come out. And for the investors who are listening, this is no longer a fad. This is out of necessity. You know, the retail investor is going to have to find a way to be able to do this to maximize the income being produced on these assets. Values are not going down. Like we ebb and flow but through cycles, but overall values aren't going to be crashing like some people say they are. You know, I think that if you can figure out a way to either develop or increase the efficiencies of buildings you currently have by adding suites, I think that's going to be the next wave of retail investment. So like understanding these products and how the money works is going to be the single most important thing that you could possibly do to set yourself up for success when looking to invest and develop. You know, before you go to your bank, and your bank would be, okay, yep, you make enough money, you can debt service the properties, like you're good to go. I don't think we're going to go into a time when rates are going to be that low again, or numbers are going to work at the level they were previously working at. So, you know, setting the groundwork and of understanding how these products are going to work, I think it's going to be the key to success for most investors and developers who are looking to make money in real estate over the next decade.
100%. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you take a look at like, we almost lost CMHC financing being based on the CMB. I mean, like, the future of the CMHC financing, the bond markets, and I mean, the government's propping up the CMB right now, right? They just pumped in another 60 billion in over the last, was it last year, coming into 2024. And then what does the future look like for this ultra, competitive financing, right? And I think, what the average investor kind of needs to understand is that if you really, especially getting into the development side, if you want to get into the construction, the development side, you really need to become more like affluent with what's going on in the economy and how things ebb and flow, and how the interest rates are actually backed, and understanding like the little nuances of how much money can you shave on your energy efficiencies, and does it make more sense to target buildings in certain areas given proximities to certain sources of energies, or like the amount of greenhouse gas use, like equivalencies in certain areas compared to others, the type of building, like you take a look at stuff out east where there's still a lot of like oil burning going on. Like, does that make sense for guys to go in? What's the cost of doing that versus sticking in Ontario and taking a look at, electric, hot water, stuff like that? I think you really need to become efficient and really have a full understanding, because the construction stuff, it's tough, it's tight. You're not getting into a construction project and on the back end pulling out a huge amount of equity like you are on, like apartment building turnover, right? You're based off cost no matter what you're doing on that construction project. So, you really have to become a master of it and really start doing the education and the, the learning and understanding the markets and everything that goes into it to be able to become a successful developer and mid-sized investor.
Yeah. And becoming a master so here's my experience, because I'm far from a master. You could sink your teeth into hundreds and hundreds of pages and books and literature, or you can watch hundreds of hours, or you can kind of create a team, which is kind of, what I've done. If you have a good team because to your point, you're right. Development is not easy. Development is not easy. And like, let's look at how many people are going to be getting into this space by virtue of real estate being handed to them. Whether a parent passes it off, a family member, passes on and they give you this land, or somebody just happens to have a ton of equity in a single family home in the city of Toronto. And they're like, I qualify for a laneway suite. And then they hear about the multiplex bylaw and they're like, I could build a multiplex in the front. So like, you're going to have these retail players that come into the space, and how I think that you can create incredible wealth for yourself and get into this space is teaming up with people. Teaming up with lenders and brokers that understand the space, the importance of selecting a good general contractor, learning the nuances of the program. And honestly, because this space is so like the wild, wild west, and I'm specifically talking about the 4+1 space in the city of Toronto, learn from somebody that's done it before. The breadcrumbs of success are right there. We didn't figure it out on our own. We knocked on doors. We looked at, there was case studies in our neighborhood. They're there. The blueprint for how to do this is there. And there's efficiencies that you will find through other people's mistakes, namely mine. Namely like I've like my mistakes. I mean, that whole phrase, you could write a book on it. Well, we wrote a book on it, right? Like quite literally of the mistakes we've made over the 4 projects that we've developed. But mastering it is in my opinion, my humble opinion, it is a process of teaming up with the 4 or 5 masters. I can't be expected to know the regulatory framework of the city.
Well, it changes every 2 weeks.
Well, I can't be expected to know CMHC. I learned that from you guys. I can't be expected to know, construction practices and energy and how to build a budget and finances and then tax considerations. But my 4 or 5 partners do, right? So, and this space, if it's taught me anything, is people are dying to share what they've learned. People will literally drive to Burlington to get on a podcast to talk about stuff that they've learned. They just, they want to share and they want to be giving of their experiences before. So, I mean, that would be my humble, unsolicited advice.
Well, it works. I mean, like that's how we made our brand was like from day one, you know, when we were trying to do our own research and figure out, hey, how can we learn more about investing, financing, and how products work? We just realized there wasn't a whole lot of stuff specific to Canada. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, bigger pockets in the US and all this stuff, but you know, that's not, you know, applicable in Canada. And for us, it was a matter of, okay, well, let's just start talking to lenders and figuring out how they're structuring things and what they're doing. And, you know, we'll just tell that to people. And, you know, like we've never held back anything, you know, whereas the old days, it was like, oh, you want to learn how to do something? Well, you know, come sign up, you know, fill an application, give me all your SIN and stuff like that. And then maybe like I'll explain stuff to you. But, you know, I mean, we've done videos where we like quite literally screenshotted us underwriting a deal and showed how everything works. And, you know, that like that's done wonders for us. And it's put us in touch with amazing people like yourself and being able to build that partnership. And yeah, I mean, if you're, you know, I think too, like not only as a way for someone who wants to try to find business, but also if you're someone who's trying to find partners, like showcasing your skills and you know, kind of showing people what you know, it's not also going to just find you business, but it's also going to have people gravitate who are looking for a partner that's maybe missing your side of it, right? If you're a city planner or if you're in the energy space or you're an engineer and you're looking for a finance or a lawyer or this or that, like someone else who's doing the same projects, they're going to be looking on the internet for, you know, your information that you have to provide. And if they can find you and they figure out that you know your stuff, you know, that's an opportunity for you to passively be able to find, you know, partners, people to come in and be a part of your team instead of you having to, you know, actively be hunting and looking for people.
Yeah, I mean, we've already done all the research. You've already made all the mistakes. You know, I wish 2-3 years ago, you know, there was somebody out there who was able to tell us like, this is the thing, you shouldn't do this or you should do this. But also, to your point, keep up to date on the things that are changing. You know, my job and Aaron's job is to understand day of what is happening and how it's going to affect our clients. Like, there's nobody who gets paid other than us to be able to actually understand it fundamentally. So, like, have people on your team who know exactly what's happening, when it's happening, how it's going to affect your project. And unfortunately, if you're in the middle of a project, it might still affect your project. So, like, you might know something when you started, but if you don't have that person who's on your team walking you through the whole way, you might have a really tough day when it comes to refinancing your building and you realize that the rules changed. Selfishly, let's get into capital really quick. I mean, obviously, Aaron and I, we help people structure capital. The MLSelect program obviously has phenomenal insurance flexibilities, high loan to value options. Everybody wants the 5% down construction project. Sorry guys, it doesn't exist. You need more than 5% down. But why don't you get into your process? Like, you've done this missing middle construction debt before with a few different lenders. Talk about how it went for you.
Yeah. I guess I can get into one project that we have in Riverdale, Toronto right now. It's a bit of a showcase project. So I should preface it with, you know, again, all that glitters is not gold. It worked out for us only because it was our third project. So we had figured things out. We had acquired, like, do you want to get into like the numbers on like a...
No, you don't have to get into numbers. No, you can just get into like, how was the process?
Yeah, sure.
What was the draws like?
Okay, yeah, sure. So
was it easy? Was it hard?
Well, it's not easy. No. The MLSelect program, you know, the government has this incredible way of advertising and marketing rebates and incentives and their push, and it's incredibly tedious. And had it not been for me having a good team, we wouldn't have done it, right? I think I mentioned before, it was 23 revisions on a budget. So how was it? In my experience, the MLSelect program is not custom tailored for loan amounts under $10 million. So, you know, what do I mean by that? There was requirements that were put on us, like geotechnical, environmental assessments that we had to strike out from our clauses because they didn't make sense in the city of Toronto with like these little infill projects. Then we drastically underestimated the draw process. You know, not only is there a pretty sizable cost for every construction draw, but you have to have a quantity surveyor visit site. You need your architect to come out to site and sign off on things. They want to make sure that your GC has been paid up to date. So it's important to know that I have used construction financing for all of my developments in Toronto. We've learned lessons the hard way, and I could speak to like the benefit of it. The benefit of it is that we've been able to access construction financing at prime plus a quarter. So I think our construction financing rates are like 6.7% right now, which is unheard of,
Yeah,
right?
unreal.
And for complicated construction projects like infill developments, always factor in, a delay in construction that's going to take you an extra couple of months. We learned the hard way to contact Toronto Hydro almost on day one and get assigned a designer for like your main hookups. Same thing with water, right? So like changing single family homes and converting them to multifamily that have like 50 to 60 fixtures requires you to update, your piping from both the city and then to the main. But all's to say that construction is always going to be, if you budget 12 months for construction, kick it out to 16, right? We applied for our COI a little bit too early, and then we got to this area where it was going to expire, and it's because we waited 12 months for a building permit with the City of Toronto. So that's a common mistake that we made that we stopped making. It's important to choose a general contractor that has multifamily experience. If they don't, I mean, even if they've done something similar to multifamily, if CMHC does not see experience with vertically stacked plumbing and their in-depth understanding of like fire separation and they're just going to deny you, right? I learned the hard way, when you are applying to CMHC, you need to have all of your ducks in a row. You need to have your design, you need to have your pro forma, you need to have your budget, and you need to have your GC selected. You almost have to be build ready.
Yeah.
Right. So my experience with it is,
And you have to have, if you have a building in place, that building's got to be demolished.
The-
That's
well-
and that's not covered in the budget either. Like that's
and that's new too, right? So now they want to see the building has been demolished. So
Jayden, let's talk about capital requirements really quick. I mean,
Sure.
again, I touched on it a little bit. 95% loan to cost means that's the maximum amount of debt CMHC is going to give you at the end of your project based off of a pro forma or a lease up, depending on the project. How much capital did you really need to make that happen? Like, you built these 4+1s.
yeah. I mean, like I could tell you like a really attractive story, or I could just be completely like factual with you.
Let's
Like,
go realistic.
Okay. I want to do both.
it is the most common question we get is how much
money?
capital do I actually have to bring to this? And
Actually, you know what? Let me explain here. I'll answer your question, but I'll answer it backwards. So we're working on this project right now in Riverdale. We bought it for $1 million, right? I'm happy to open up the numbers on this. Bought it for $1 million. The construction budget and soft cost is about 1.6. So now we're all in for about 2.6 million. It's been appraised at 3.7
As complete.
as complete. So, we have that nice little bump. And I believe that they are willing to advance us $2.6 million on the loan. So our minimum equity required at any given time is about $130,000. Sounds great, right?
Yeah.
It's like, wow, you have a 3.7 million multifamily in the city of Toronto for 130, like, sounds great. Let me tell you the reality. The reality is that we had to have the cash on hand to buy the house with no debt because it sat there doing nothing while we waited for a building permit. Now I'm told City of Toronto is speeding things up, but we needed that cash on hand. Then you need some working capital. So budget for whatever CMHC tells you in your COI that your minimum equity requirement is, budget for about $300,000 more than that. So, I mean, you need a little bit of money and you need partners in order to do what it is that I'm doing. When it's all said and done, yeah, we're gonna be able to take out the majority of the money that we put in to buy and to build. But even like this whole 95% loan to value thing, it's very attractive sounding, but we're nowhere close to that. Like we're going to be at like 65% loan to value.
Yeah, I mean, construction in general is the most capital intensive investment you could possibly have. Just setting realistic expectations, especially with the new rules around having to demolish the house first. You're all cash up front, and then you have to have that house demolished before you can even submit to CMHC. Now they want proof the structure is gone. And now that's a new rule that came out, like say a month ago. So anybody who is looking to do any infill in Toronto, I mean, there's no lots of land in Toronto anymore. So, it really pigeonholes you into deciding, am I going to go with CMHC on this? Or am I going to look at an alternative lender, which a lot of the missing middle is looking at right now. You have less capital requirements. You don't have to demolish the house and pay for it in cash. You can get quicker capital to you. Closing is much faster. There's a lot of advantages of looking at the alternative financing and still getting that CMHC takeout on the back end if you have the time to do it.
And most people aren't buying properties in cash. I mean, as great as it is and easy that makes your project move forwards, most people are getting a mortgage. And if there's a house on that mortgage, people are trying to get as high as possible. They want that 80% because it minimizes, right? And what people don't understand is like one of the most expensive pieces of doing a construction project is just carrying the carrying cost of that land or that home until you get into it, right? And most of the time, you're probably in some sort of private financing, so you're probably around like 9 to 11%. And permits aren't quick. SPA, it's supposed to be expedited, but at the end of the day, you're still waiting on your permits anyway. So to carry that for 12 months or 18 months, whatever that is, that's a big carrying cost for a lot of people. And I don't think they really understand. How many times you get a deal where they're like, well, we're gonna permits in 6 months, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah,
like they're not even gonna pick it up in 6 months. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
Our interest reserve is the largest line item in our soft
Yeah.
cost.
Yeah.
It's the largest one by, and then the next one is the CMHC application fee.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. There is, it's cumbersome. There is a hybrid model that is working right now where private construction money, I think, just makes a little bit more sense.
well, you're funding in 6 weeks instead of right now 4, 5, 6 months, depending on how lucky you are with CMHC. And again, if you're in that 10-ish% debt, it's another 4 or 5 months that you got to carry it on. You take a look at the draw structure with CMHC. 3 weeks sometimes with CMHC plus the cost of actually getting those draws. If you got 4 draws, that's you're waiting almost 12 weeks. That's almost like call it a little bit of give back in maybe 2 months, but you're adding on to that project. Whereas with a semi-private with a MIC, you can get funding within a week. It's a little bit cheaper. You're keeping your guys on site, which is huge in a market like today where the construction side, they're looking for jobs. There's not as many guys in real estate, just obviously with the rates. So the jobs are cut back. They want their men working. They want to make more money. If you're taking a month to pay them, they might go kick over to another job site. And if that guy's paying them right away, you're going to have a hard time getting them back onto your job site. So I think even just the small, like little nitty gritties of the structuring and how long it takes for an advance and stuff like that, if you have more capital, you can front the cost until you get that tranche back from the lender, right? Like, what's the cost of giving your guys, half or 75% of their invoice just to keep them on the site? Yeah, it's money out of your pocket, but in the long run, having that excess capital to be able to keep them on site and keep your project moving forwards is going to save you overall. You got the 10% construction lien holdback that you got to consider if you're not building with, even if you're doing MLI or CMHC construction, if you're going standard CMHC, there's rental achievement above 75%. So even it's actually kind of funny, like the fact that MLSelect has become such the hot topic for construction because 95% loan to cost. Standard construction has been 100% loan to cost forever. No one's ever talked about that. Like you would think out of the two numbers, people would be talking about 100% loan to cost and not 95%. But on the standard side, to get that additional tranche above 75%, you have to have rental achievement. Like there's all these additional costs that aren't obvious when you take a look at the numbers and being sold on that 95%. That just at the end of the day, people are digging in their pockets and be like, oh, I wasn't really realizing this. And then I guess to my point is, there isn't like a minimum amount of money that you got to kind of bring into this deal. Like, like in theory, I guess there is, but at the end of the day, like, do you maybe want to get approved and maybe want to complete your project or like, like show the lender that, hey, like, I'm going to be able to get this done. Like, this is who I am. I have strength. Not like, hey, I got, I'm going to be $0 on completion day and I'm limping across the finish line, right? Like when you take a look at construction in today's environment, the big guys are kind of going tits up, right? Like there's projects that are half finished. How many projects have you heard about going into receivership?
Yeah.
Like there's so many issues going on for guys that actually have experience, constructing versus a new guy getting into their first development that's bringing just the basic amount of money across. And trying to get that project done, right? And then, they wonder why it's so hard to get the construction financing, and how come I'm not getting the 95% loan to cost? Why am I at 70? How come I have to bring this 30% into the project? Like
Yeah, you need cash.
That's the world.
Yeah, you need
You need cash. You need cash. It's a misconception that you can do it with 5% equity in, right?
You're being sold snake oil. It's not real.
Well,
It
your
is
cost
snake
of
oil, right?
fees and reports are double the 5%. I mean, you're automatically at 10. Even if you were 5% in on a mid-sized project, your fees and your reports and costs and all the additional costs out of pocket are probably double that 5% anyways.
I find it funny how the product predated the market. This missing middle is being created, out of necessity, obviously from retail investors, but also the big guys. It's not penciling right now, and you have all this money being invested into this increased densification and allowing people to go in and do these things. The product was created, but not with the intention of helping the small guy. Like CMHC became a household name because people needed a way out of their projects, and then there were a handful of people in the industry who decided they were going to share how this worked, and it became the thing that everybody uses now. But as this market grows, we're already seeing it in front of our eyes, but the federal government, the provincial government, they're creating new products and ways in which people can go about qualifying for it. I think you start to see renditions or additions to this to hopefully make that process on this mid-sized stuff a little bit more affordable. I've had some conversations with some of the lenders about trying to facilitate this missing middle, transaction. It is extremely difficult for them to do.
Well, it's all the work.
It's all the work.
It's all the work of a $50 million loan or a $20 million loan for $3 million.
And I don't think that, and it sounds dumb because, you have us talking about, well, $5 million to most people, it's a ton of money. But when you talk about like how the new structure with even with lenders who can facilitate CMHC loans now, they're flooded with loans, like completely overwhelmed with the amount of loans that are coming in, and they're all above $10 million. So, our listeners who are listening, like, the amount of construction that is being introduced right now is for purpose-built rentals is astronomical, and, there isn't really anybody who is perfectly situated to taking it on. We're trying our best to work with our lenders to be able to find the most streamlined way to do this. But I find it interesting how the market is opening, but for the ones who are looking for the opportunity, it is there and it's going to be there. It's just, you're a pioneer in this like 5+ development space. They haven't built really mid-sized purpose-built multi since like the 70s. It wasn't, everybody moved to condos, and there wasn't a ton of housing being built. So we're entering this era of new financing and just like taking the steps to do that.
Yeah, every single $10 million cutoff loan that was going through a broker now has to go directly through a lender. So like the pricing is going to go up. I mean, like we've already talked to some of our lenders. They're moving into bigger areas. They're getting bigger offices. They're hiring more people. They're doubling their staff because they have to take on double the deals now. Like your pricing is going to go up, your timeline is going to turn around. Your applications are going to be more expensive. So again, like everything is pushing these big lenders away from the sub 10 million for sure. Definitely the sub 5 million. The sub 5 million is so difficult to get done. It's
not impossible, but
not
difficult.
impossible. But like and again, like when you're competing against all these other people, they're submitting for a $5 million and under construction loan. Are you the guy that's just bringing the bare minimum amount of capital, or are you the guy that's bringing the experience? And hey, I got 20% of the budget no matter what I got to bring in. Plus, I've already sunk in, I have the land and cash and all this additional stuff, right? And there are guys that are out there that are mid-level developers, and they have that liquidity, right? And they have the strength. And unfortunately, you're fighting against absolutely everybody as a first-time developer. So, yeah, there isn't a minimum. It's you got to bring your best. You got to bring your best game to the table, right, and present that to a lender.
Yeah, you got to be build ready. You got to look like you know what you're doing, and you got to be able to leverage, at the very least, a competent general contractor, at the very least, and then you should be working with people in your space that know what they're talking about, right?
It takes one project before, halfway through you run out of money and you're bankrupt and it's in receivership and that's it, right? Like that's your development career, right? And it makes more sense to partner up with someone who has the experience learn the ropes, figure out how to get it done. Yeah, you're splitting the project, but at the end of the day, you're also building your own resume and your own CV, which
Interesting. Yeah, sure.
the lender wants to see
A
as
hundred
well too.
percent.
And
Yeah.
you know, figure it out. Like have some successful projects, then go branch out on your own, or put together a team. Whatever it is. Like
But that's it. Just even like just join a team that's doing it or has done it. Get some successful wins under your belt, and then if you want to go rogue and go off on yourself, yeah, I agree.
yeah.
Jayden, you said you wrote the book on it. Talk about that. I know we've had a few conversations about it, and I think for a lot of our listeners, they'd be interested in hearing about this. But Jayden and his team legitimately wrote the book on the 4+1 in the GTA, what to do, what not to do. What is that?
So yeah, the playbook or the manual that we're calling it was kind of birthed out of necessity. We would do energy models for loan amounts typically under $10 million. That probably makes up about half of our business. And we found they would come back and say, okay, so we have the energy modeling report, which is one of 3 required documents that you need to submit to CMHC. Can you help me with my budget? Like, what do I need? Like, my budget isn't working, right? Or I need an appraisal. Help me with the appraisal. Help me build my pro forma. How did you build your rent assumptions? Tell me how you calculated your expenses. So it was birthed just out of me, frankly, not wanting to hold hands and not being able to hold 300 customers' hands through the entire process. So my partner and I, we built a playbook that breaks down all of the regulatory framework that we deal with in the city of Toronto. We're in the midst of building one out right now for Alberta, but whatever. We have an entire chapter on the CMHC application process from our eyes. Everything that we've gone through, clauses that you need to strike out with both your general contractor, clauses that you need to strike out with your insurance company, clauses you need to strike out with geotechnical and environmental, as I mentioned before. Then we talk about the energy. We get into every kind of best practice of high performance new construction, where to look at different building code bylaws that give you allowance on grandfathering non-combustible walls with combustible walls. Because I'll tell you, the cost difference is dramatic. We talk a lot about some of the things we touched on earlier, which is low-hanging fruit projects, commissioning equipment, how to get your building across that 40% finish line. Then we get into the financials. So we actually have provided our line-by-line construction budget, all the financial assumptions that have made our projects work that we think will work for others. Whether they're going private for construction or CMHC, ultimately your exit is CMHC. That's the ultimate goal. So a mistake that people can make is not incorporating energy efficiency into their preliminary design, right? Going and getting a building permit before you've talked to somebody that can help you with their energy modeling.
And that's a big point because a lot of the newer investors, like from all the conversations I've had with anyone on the energy side, they would much rather prefer to see a game plan, like in terms of what are you looking to do so we can tell you this is going to work or not, versus all the new guys are looking for that guidance in terms of like they want to be told like how to put it together, right? So they're coming to you guys maybe with like some rough drawings and an appraisal and saying, hey, like how do I get my points? And you're like, well, you're giving me no guidelines. Like I have nothing to work off of.
Give me your wish list.
Yeah.
Tell me what you either have to do. Tell me what you want to do. Tell me your budget, right? Yeah. So like the earlier you engage with an energy modeler, whether you're building from scratch or even before you buy a property, you're going to be better off on your long-term plan, which is to exit, right? Exit with CMHC. So yeah, the playbook that we have, we've been giving it to all of our clients, or we share it with our clients to do the energy modeling, but it is our journal of everything we've learned over the last 4 years of converting single family homes to the 4+1. Probably the most important thing in that book is the mistakes we've made from a construction standpoint to a structuring standpoint to dealing with CMHC. So, we talk on how to waive development charges. We talk on the GST and HST implications. So it's something that we've put together over the last couple of years, and now we're kind of bringing it to market. The reception has been really, really good, and yeah, it's kind of like our story to date.
How does somebody, if they did want to take a look at that or have a conversation with you? I mean, we'll put a link down below. Obviously, if there's a way to get in touch with you about buying that, but like, they just reach out, like.
Yeah, I'm pretty available for phone calls. Like I live on my phone, so I'm happy to interface with anybody. Typically, we do house tours, like of our properties, once a month.
Cool.
I try to spearhead a property tour where I can showcase this is a garden suite, this is a laneway suite, this is a fourplex. We have a bunch of projects. They're on the east side of Toronto, so fairly accessible. And that's, it's if anybody wants to come out once a month, please come out. Otherwise, yeah, reach out to me and I can walk you through the playbook on a high level and see if I can be of any assistance with what it is you're trying to do.
Yeah, amazing. I think this is a great conversation. I think people are going to get a ton of value out of it. For people who are in the middle of your projects and looking at your next one, having different conversations about your projects it starts with that conversation, and then it might even save you a ton of money down the road. So, as this industry expands, as the need for this type of development expands, I think that the same things we were doing previously aren't going to be the same things that we're doing in the future. So, as this evolves into something that's a little bit more than just a new product, understanding the intricacies of how the financing works, of how the energy works, is paramount to the success of a project. So if anybody has any questions about what that looks like, obviously Aaron and I are available, as well as Jayden. If you want to leave the listeners with anything.
Work with a good team. Work with a good team. I think that's, I was talking with my business partner on the car ride out here right now, and you're right, the space is like living. It's changing by the hour. It's changing by the day. And he said something to me because I'm like, I wonder what they're going to ask me about. I'm like, these are really, really two bright guys and they're smart guys. I learned from them. And he's like, Jayden, you can't be expected to know anything. In fact, if you did, we'd be failing right now as a business, right? If you were the guy that had to learn everything. So yeah, work with a good team. It's a very giving ecosystem that I find. Everybody wants to share what it is that they've learned. So don't be afraid to ask.
Absolutely, yeah. And with that, we will let everybody go. Really appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will catch you next episode.
Appreciate it, everyone. Thank you.
Ciao.